Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Joining me today is Whitney Webb, here to discuss her new article, a very important article. We've talked about in the past about CIA and Mossad-Linked surveillance systems, specifically Carbine 911, during our election special that Whitney and I did during 2020 discussions, and trying to predict, theorizing about where this would go, a lot of which actually came to pass. She recently came out with a new article in regard to a company called Gabriel, and this seems to be the continual extension, the creep of the pre-crime direction. So inviting her on to have a talk about this. Whitney Webb, how are you today?
Hey, doing well. Good to be back on TLAV as always.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you. This is a good article too. I think that this is, as we were saying before, something that doesn't get enough attention. Really, as we've said many times before, to me, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it does make a difference, obviously, depending on what governments, some are worse than others, in my opinion, but really whatever government is having an outsized influence on policy or surveillance within another country, specifically, the US where I am residing, that makes me very uncomfortable. But specifically with the Israeli government and the history around what's been done in foreign policy and domestic, it makes me really concerned. So, start wherever you want, really. We can talk about what we talked about previously, or, just wherever you want to begin here, because this is a kind of a gigantic topic.
Yeah, it is a gigantic topic. So basically, I guess I'll just start off with the point that this is, as I see it, sort of a team up of CIA and Israeli intelligence, or American and Israeli intelligence. Maybe it's better to say.
Mhm.
And if you look through the history, in the books I put out last year, for example, I talk a lot about how American intelligence and organized crime, they team up, and then the state of Israel's created not long after that. And a lot of the same organized crime figures that had teamed up with the CIA were really involved with arming the paramilitary groups that later create the state of Israel. And those groups, of course, turn into the Haganah, turn into the IDF and all of that. And so all of these same entities have been swimming around each other for a very long time. And then you have the CIA and Israeli intelligence collaborating in a lot of illicit activities and past intelligence link scandals, like Iran-Contra, for example, intimately involving both. Okay, so as we've talked about in the past pretty extensively, Iran-Contra is the period of time where the U.S. national security state arguably, they tried to do this a little bit before as well, but it became really obvious that they were trying to essentially create sort of a pre-crime system in the event of a vaguely defined national emergency as part of these continuity of government protocols, right? And this has always been very dependent on data mining. Even back then in the 80s, when the world wasn't nearly as digitized or as dependent on digital technologies as it is today, they were still, using what they could, the capabilities they had back then to profile people, decide if anyone might be a threat to the state in the event of one of these emergencies. And as we've talked about before, you could be put on that particular list for attending a protest, not paying your taxes on time. It didn't necessarily apply to people who were showing overt violence. It was, people who were essentially thought criminals and stuff back then.
Right.
And Israel was really involved with the development of that database. And a lot of this is intimately tied up with the Promise software scandal, which happened at around the same time. And of course, involved both Israeli and U.S. intelligence. And on the Israeli intelligence side, people may be familiar with Robert Maxwell's outsized involvement in that. But essentially, this was the same software used to profile dissidents. And that was one of the reasons that Robert Maxwell was selling the Promise software to all these countries around the world, specifically in Latin America, where they were using Promise as a means to sort of supercharge their dissident elimination efforts as part of Operation Condor and things like that. So there's a long history of pre-crime in the US, and pretty much every time you follow how that's developed from, this point where I'm talking about in the 80s up until now, it's Israeli and American intelligence working together. So I just want to make that point really clear. Like, I'm not being like, this is all one guy, and, our intelligence agencies are very much complicit in this, and it's been a collaborative thing for decades. So that's why it's important to sort of have that context. And the other thing too, in which I cite in the article. There was this article in the British Journal of Criminology that was basically trying to explain what pre-crime is, and it made a really salient point that basically what pre-crime is about is the merging of national security, i.e.,
Right.
intelligence agencies, with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And basically, yes, this is a coup by intelligence agencies, and pre-crime has always been intended to be that. Essentially, that's what you have again back in the Iran-Contra. This was the U.S. national security state. This was the CIA, or people on the National Security Council, and people in military intelligence and things like that involved in these efforts. And as we've talked about again on the program before, these efforts, of course, happened a lot after 9/11, involving a lot of the same people, again, trying to get military intelligence or intelligence agencies through things like total information awareness, basically doing this exact same thing. And there's been different iterations of that. One, for example, being Palantir, sort of being an outgrowth of that's still around today and doing a lot of this predictive policing, pre-crime stuff. And a lot of these companies, whether they're founded by Israelis or founded by Americans, they share a lot of the same investors, the venture capital people, the same people on their boards. And it's pretty clear who's doing what and for what purpose, right? And I also want to say that some of my past reporting for TLAV as well on stuff like the WEF Partnership Against Cybercrime, which is also led by an Israeli military intelligence guy involved in a lot of the same circles that are actually in this article, that is all about trying to get national security agencies to fuse with the banks, the financial sector. So at the same time, just for context here, before we get into the specifics of this article, you have the national security state at the same time trying to take over both law enforcement and the banks. That's insane. And no one's talking about that. And I think a lot of people need to focus on these issues, because it's a lot more than just a surveillance system. So like some people just read the headline and didn't read the article, right? And they're like, well, yeah, it's probably not good to have cameras watching your kids all the time, but it's not that bad. No, because as we'll see here, this particular company, it's not just like cameras like that people have been using for decades to like watch stuff. These are smart cameras with a lot of different functionalities, and the goal is to basically automate responses, or that's not even the right way to explain it. So I guess we should just probably get into the specifics of the article to sort of explain what the system is and why it's really should not be all over schools, churches, synagogues, community centers,
everywhere,
all these different places
as you make clear. Your article, this is sprawling. They're obviously starting on this first ledge, but it's very clear, as you make in the article, that they're trying to get this in ubiquitously across the United States. But you mentioned a couple things, and let's get into the I really, the main core part of this really does stand out to me. The history around it and how it's been used with the same individuals. Now it's already about kind of monitoring the dissidents, and that's this quiet background to what's being built under the guise of stopping shootings. Like that's the point you keep making in this article. And it's so
or Biden's war on domestic terrorism. There's a major pre-crime component to that, and pre-crime and censorship are all about eliminating dissent.
Right. And again, the whole white supremacy kind of clumsy overlay to the whole thing, and it's so transparent. But this is where this is interesting to note. And I think I say this anytime this conversation comes up, that we need to remember that, especially today, when talking about the main core, which you mentioned in there, and this comes from the whole constitutive government plan. That's the list of the dangerous people, if in the event of one of those emergencies, that people who are too constitutionalists, believe too much in the Constitution, are in fact verifiably listed under those kind of lists, which just shows you where these people are really coming from. The whole merging the national security state with law enforcement, and you mentioned the banks. I mean, isn't this just the World Economic Forum model that we're talking about? Is that how you see that overlap? Is it just the same thing?
Yeah. Well, so I don't want to get too off topic, but like the Partnership Against Cybercrime stuff that I wrote about for TLAV, I think in 2021, it basically was like, so look at Israel. In Israel, they created the cybersecurity, national security linked bureau. and they essentially merged with the banks and their regulators to stop cybercrime. And so we should replicate that model everywhere. And, a lot of these models, I talk about in the article, for example, how Netanyahu has openly talked about how it's deliberate policy that they have merged the tech industry and their national security state. Like the private tech industry, like it's a deliberate policy, and he even says so. And he also throws academia in the mix, that it's the military, intelligence, academia, and industry all together. And this is really a recipe for fascism. And if you look at the history of Likud, which is of course Netanyahu's party, and Menachem Begin and Irgun, Irgun is the precursor to Likud, and Irgun was created by a guy, I think his name was Jabotinsky was his last name. And he overtly was very clear that he modeled his group after the policies of Benito Mussolini, who is best known for his corporatism model of fascism, which is a merging of corporate and state power. Right. So that's essentially what you have here. And Israel has been used to sort of incubate that model. And a lot of it has come from the fact that Israel, since it was founded in 1948, has been under a continual state of emergency. We're going to constantly be destroyed. We're constantly in a state of war and all of this stuff. Right. So they've been able to justify a lot of these policies for a pretty extensive amount of time relative to other countries. And if you read books that praise the startup culture of Israel, like the one written by Dan Senor, who was a big guy at the Foreign Policy Initiative, which is the successor to the Project for a New American Century. He's like an American neocon guy. He basically, his argument for why Israel's startup culture is so successful is because they've merged the military with industry. Right. And I mean, that's essentially the Mussolini model at the end of the day.
And that's kind of where I think, if you tell me where I think we should start on that, is, because that seems like the really central point in all this. We can either start with the anonymous funding. So I think that's obviously one of the central kind of problems, or the background of previously up until now, and even this company, or either Carbine or Gabriel, having essentially either current or ex-Mossad, like behind the scenes, like really on the surface. Yeah. So go ahead. Where do you want to begin with that?
So this policy that I'm talking about with Netanyahu and co. went into overdrive in 2012. And in 2012 is when they did a lot of things happen. Startup Nation Central was created by Paul Singer, who's an American hedge fund guy, actually Dan Senor's boss. That was basically about preventing any country from opposing Israeli domestic or foreign policy by making them dependent on Israeli technology and technology companies that are tied to the national security state of Israel. So, that obviously has troubling implications. Also in 2012, there was the creation of Israel's National Cyber Bureau, the head of which is now the head of strategy at the World Economic Forum, and is basically promoting the propagation of this corporatist model on a global scale. His name is Tal Goldstein. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second, because a lot of this is kind of all So 2012 was also the year when they had this deliberate policy was made, which I referenced in the article, and it's been admitted in Israeli mainstream media, that basically operations that were done in-house by the Israeli military and intelligence agencies were transferred to private companies, some of those private companies being created for that explicit purpose. In other cases, intelligence agents working on doing operations and different projects for intelligence agencies. When they're doing that within the intelligence agencies, they were encouraged by their superiors to create essentially a front company to do that, within the private sector. So since then, there have been a slew of Israeli tech companies that have come on the scene that have been created by alumni of all these intelligence agencies. And so given that that's an explicit policy, you can't really know for sure if a company, an Israeli tech company, is one of those fronts, or is it not? Some companies we've heard of, have been admitted as being fronts as part of this program. The most well-known one, of course, is Black Cube, which became kind of notorious in past years because of its association with people like Ehud Barak, Harvey Weinstein, and whatnot. But Carbine 9/11, is pretty obviously one as well, because Ehud Barak was the guy that created it. And it
Mhm.
had ties to Jeffrey Epstein and all other sorts of Peter Thiel, who created Palantir, is a major funder of it as well. And, it's basically what it's seeking to do is construct this pre-crime system that, as we've talked about already, has been a longstanding agenda of collaborative efforts of American and Israeli intelligence. So Carbine does that. And so does this company called Gabriel. They're basically building, as I note in the article, a very extensive pre-crime infrastructure in locations that would never really seek to have any sort of that infrastructure installed in their buildings and at their
Mm.
locations,
Well, and
right?
so we oh, go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
well, basically, Gabriel and Carbine fit together very well, and they fit together with another company called Mark 43, which is the main people backing that is David Petraeus, the former CIA director and I guess head of forces in, like, I think it was Iraq or Afghanistan, I can't remember.
Mhm.
And then Jeff Bezos and Ashton Kutcher and people like that. So, and David Petraeus is also now a major investor in Carbine. So,
Of course.
they're interconnected. And then you have links between all these other guys. Like one of the main investors in Carbine and one of the main investors in Gabriel are the same, Hanaco Ventures and stuff like that. So there's, a lot of interconnections between them. And of course, as I note in the article, Gabriel's advisory board is stuffed with, former deputy directors of Mossad, former heads of the intelligence directorate at Israel, all sorts of people like that, as well as, former top FBI guys, former top CIA guys. It's again, a collaboration of Israeli and American intelligence.
Right.
And it's not just the advisory board. Israeli media reports on this particular company note that it's also backed by top leaders in Mossad, the
Mhm.
FBI, and the CIA.
Yeah, it's just
So, that's pretty telling.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm jokingly, former, and it certainly could be, but even then, like as you made clear in your article, and again, the only reason it looks like this is because when you highlight unlimited hangout, it gets really tiny and it's hard to see. So I do the
Oh, it's
simplified
okay.
version. Again, here's the article, which will include the show notes. What you write here as well, yeah, I mean, again, to make it very, very clear, it's not just, oh well, we encourage former military and intelligence to start their own companies, but like overtly arguing, as you write here, he outlined in this policy at the cyber tech conference in Tel Aviv. He stated that Israel's emergence as one of the top 5 cyber powers had required allowing this combination of military intelligence, academia, and industry to converge in one place. That's not the same thing. He's literally telling you, as you're saying, that we're blending these things, not just allowing them
Yeah,
to make
it's
companies.
intentional.
Right,
In the
right.
interview that I cite above that paragraph, he admits
Mhm.
he calls it a very deliberate policy. And in
Right.
the paragraph below that paragraph, you have former head of Mossad, Tamer Pardo, saying that his words, everyone in Israeli cyber tech, in their cyber tech sector is an alumni of Israeli intelligence.
Like
And then he compares Mossad itself to a startup. And then after he leaves Mossad, he goes and becomes the chair of one of these companies that again shares some of the same investors and people on the board as Carbine and some of these other ones, Sepio Systems, a cybersecurity company. It's nuts. At some point I'd like to map out all these companies and how they share
Yeah,
their,
I want to see that.
the same people on their board and the same funders and see what sort of comes up. But for now, Carbine is one of these companies that is pretty clearly one of them. And of course, the only one that's been officially admitted is Black Cube. But I think by the time
Right.
this article came out from Israeli mainstream media in 2019, they'd already been kind of exposed as that anyway.
Right.
So,
Well, this
you
one's
know,
been removed, which is interesting. This is one of the links we talked about during the election special, in regard to Carbine.
yeah.
The page is gone,
So,
but here's the way
mhm.
back. Just to show you. Go ahead and talk after this. This is this is the guy we're talking about right here, who is a former Israeli army officer who served in different positions in the special elite forces and intelligence corps. So can you speak
Yeah,
on why?
well,
Go ahead.
yeah, well,
Go
I'm
ahead.
planning to write an update about Carbine because since, they were exposed as having like Ehud Barak as the chairman of their board, Epstein Associates as directors of the company, Epstein himself put $1 million into it, and all these other
Mhm.
connections. All the co-founder, they've overhauled their board. They took almost everyone up and they've replaced them all with Americans. People like Michael
Nice.
Chertoff,
That's how it's actually more
for
telling than I think they realize, actually.
yeah, well, because they're not trying to really market this so much in Israel. Their
No.
focus is the United States with Carbine
Right.
and also Mexico, oddly enough. It's
Ugh.
mainly the US and Mexico.
Could
Um, yeah, I don't really know why that is. But yeah, so Carbine's one of these companies that, well, I guess let me explain what Carbine does.
That's what I was
So
gonna ask.
basically Carbine
The overlap
is,
actually to Gabriel and
yeah.
Carbine,
Mhm.
right? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Carbine is poised to be the new 911 emergency system in the United States. It's already running in numerous counties, and actually last year, which is also the same year that Gabriel started getting installed all over the place, the U.S. Congress approved, I think, like 10. I think it was billion. I might be
Mhm.
wrong. It was an insane amount of money to basically create a nationwide interconnected 911 system called Next Generation 911 to replace the legacy system of existing 911 call centers, which are generally based locally, and it's a decentralized system. So they want to make it nationwide and interconnected. And Carbine basically has all these other functionalities offering instant GPS location and live video feeds of the emergencies, which is what they use to sell it to people, and that you can also text 911 and all of this stuff. But what they don't tell you is that when you call 911 on your phone and the 911 system you're calling is connected to Carbine, they can pull pretty much everything off of your phone and have indefinite access to your microphone and video. And they use that. It's not on their website anymore, but at the time we talked about it, it
Right.
was. But they use that to analyze your past and current behavior and use it to predict what you'll do in the future, i.e., the
Man.
predictive policing pre-crime functionality. And that's the same vision that Gabriel has for its products. So
But more
Carbine's the
reaching.
911 system. Mark 43 is the software for law enforcement that does a lot of the same stuff.
Hmm.
And then Gabriel's the one for all these civilian locations. It
Right.
focuses mainly on schools, houses of worship, community centers, but now it's trying to expand to banks, to retail stores, to data centers and corporate campuses for the biggest big tech companies in the country, the five big companies. So like Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Google, blah, blah, blah.
Jeez.
Um,
Is the
and
argument
all
that
of
these
those.
companies then have access to all the data of those locations?
Well, of course they would.
Jesus, think about that. Like, and then so we're talking big five tech companies, which have, I mean, that's a lock on everything happening in this country, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I
That's
mean,
pretty
it
intense.
would be really unprecedented. So, if you see those, three companies as working together, uh,
My God.
it starts to look totally insane.
And think about the
Especially
people
when you
screaming about,
consider, oh, mhm.
no, sorry, just think about people screaming about, I mean, rightly so, China, Russia, these people are wildly pro-Israel and we're worried about a foreign takeover, or attacking this kind of, and I think we made this same point in 2020. It's right on the surface where you can see the Israel's government doing the same thing they accuse the other countries of, but they don't talk about that. I just want to make sure people see that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't talk about it. It's unfortunate, but I don't necessarily see this as a foreign takeover because our
No,
intelligence
yeah.
agencies are and have been complicit.
At least in their perspective, that's what it would be. But you make an excellent point. It's
Yeah,
far
and I've
long since
argued in
done.
in some past pieces at Mint, like when I was at Mint Press News, and I was writing a lot more about Israel than I do now.
Mhm.
That there was basically an effort to create what I would call a binational security state, essentially fusing the security states of the two countries, and that is a policy explicitly promoted in both the U.S. and Israel. Now, if you want to say that the reason the US has supported that is because of people like Jeffrey Epstein and Blackman, all that stuff. I mean, possibly, but a lot of these guys are just like, as long as I get more money and power for me, it doesn't really matter, what I
Yeah,
sign off on or who I team up with or whatever. So,
but I could see a valid argument could be made that even that is essentially a takeover. Like you're just abusing the corruption of the people at the top. At the same time, you're surreptitiously working your way in. Either way,
yeah.
I think it's already like you're saying
Well,
we've long
this
since been past that.
union, right, from 1948 on U.S. intelligence, Israeli intelligence, and organized crime. I mean, it,
Right,
it killed a sitting U.S. president in 1963. That was a takeover. So we're
right,
just like there's been different phases of this takeover over time, right? And
yeah,
so, now this is just the complete insane phase that they've been waiting
right.
for a really long time. If you look back at the antecedents, like we talked about a little bit earlier with Main Core. and the
So
Iran Contra stuff and all of that.
where do you see this going in the context of, I guess some of the current discussions like the Great Reset overlap, COVID-19, foreign
Yeah.
policy? Like, is it everything? I mean, where do you see
So
that
so
connecting?
this is the fourth industrial revolution coming to the criminal justice system
Mm,
and the surveillance state. Because when
right.
you see how these three companies I'm talking about fit together, it's pretty clear what's going on. So Mark 43 again is mostly backed by CIA people. The Israeli involvement in that particular company isn't so obvious, but the CIA involvement is excessively obvious.
Mm,
Yeah. And so
yeah.
with Mark 43, this is all law enforcement stuff, and it's meant to automate, I'd probably say, about half of what police officers do.
Hmm.
Right. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll reduce your work burden and all of that stuff. But as we've seen with AI and a lot of this other stuff, that is all a stepping stone to automating it completely.
Right.
Right. And
And
so, mhm.
oh, I just add in, and that the less and less human interaction, the less and less we have an opportunity to stop it, engage with it. What happens if like, just on a quick side note, I was watching this first McDonald's in, I think it was Texas, I forget, where it's like first automated McDonald's where there's no people, you can drive up and things come out. My very
Yeah,
first
it's
thought is like,
novel for now, but soon it will
right.
be all there is. That's the goal. And so
What,
they're not just doing this with fast food, they're doing this
right.
with your police department. Yeah.
Exactly,
So the
exactly. But
security
my thought,
drones.
real
Mhm.
quickly, just don't forget it. My thought is just that what happens when you go up there and suddenly you have a problem? I'm sure they're going to have some kind of process for it, but you get the wrong food, something happens, it's made wrong. What are you going to do? You know what I mean? That's kind of the world we're getting into, where you have to go through
Yeah.
those channels. Like, imagine calling one of these, call centers for some kind of internet company, and you're dealing with a constant AI system. Nobody know, it's impossible. We all know that. Get ready for everything all the time. So go ahead.
Yeah, how dystopian is that? Like,
Scary.
trapped in this, like, robotic voice customer service loop.
It's right out of Idiocracy. It's the same damn thing. God, that movie is prescient. I swear to God.
Yeah, Mike Judge, I'm really happy I share a birthday with that guy. Yeah,
Anyway, keep
anyway,
going.
so I forgot exactly what I was saying, but basically, like, we this automation is happening already in law enforcement. So
Mhm.
security drones, the robotic dogs like Spot that are already being used by various police departments across the country. Those can have both the drones, obviously, and the dogs can have weapons added to them, and that's already been happening.
I
In
don't
San
think we touched
Francisco,
on
they were
that.
about to sign off on letting them kill people, the robots,
Right.
right?
Yeah, we were reading about that. I don't
Yeah.
think we touched on that
So
though. Could you explain people the increase? We didn't touch on the drones and the kind of the logical step of taking the Gabriel systems and kind of weaponizing it, or at least being possible.
Well, I haven't even talked about Gabriel yet. This is about Mark 43, which is all this law enforcement software meant to automate about half of police work, which means they're going to reduce police size. And of course, if you're paying attention, this dovetails perfectly with the defund the police agenda
Mm,
of which is actually promoted by a lot of Silicon Valley people, oddly enough, because when you
interesting.
defund the police, oh, we have less money, but how convenient. We have this new technology that's so cost effective now that we can replace half of the police officers in the department with Mark 43's software. Well, hooray. And yeah, so Mark 43 is meant to like interface with next generation 911, which, as I just mentioned, is Carbine. Right.
Hmm.
And Gabriel is the other side, is the opposite side of this. So you have Carbine in the middle, 911 emergency services connects you to law enforcement response. Right. And on the
Hmm.
other side, you have how is 911 going to get called? Well, in 2019, when I first wrote about Carbine, they had stuff on their website talking about how in the future, things like smart city sensors, like on street lamps and stuff, would call emergency services for you without you even having to dial anything. Right.
Man.
And this idea that the calling of emergency services itself will not be done by you, it will be an automated process by smart cameras and sensors. Okay, so that's exactly what Gabriel is.
Hmm.
But it's being installed in schools, it's being installed in houses of worship and community centers, all under the guise of this will stop mass shootings, which incidentally enough was the exact same marketing uh, line, I guess,
Hmm.
that was used by Carbine in 2019 as well.
It's just rife for corruption. and
Yeah,
spying.
that's also the same year that William Barr adopted pre-crime as formal Department of Justice policy, using mass shootings as justification for that. And before he did that, he predicted that there would be a mass
Right.
shooting that would galvanize public opinion around exactly that before he announced that policy. All of that was some of my past reporting in the latter half of 2019 at Mid Press News. Very insane time to be on this particular journalistic beat, to be sure. So
Yeah.
anyway, Gabriel originally was built around its panic button. Yeah, which is like
Mhm.
installed on the wall in schools or whatever. And that was originally all it was, right? And it had a microphone, it had a camera, so it would give like live video feed right in front of the panic button. It could be activated manually or remotely through a smartphone app.
Mm.
Right. And so, that was advertised as like being a way to stop mass shootings or notify people fast or whatever, and also present video and audio, from the scene, which traditional 911 doesn't exactly do in the same
Mhm.
way, right? Well, since then, of course, they've added another way to activate the panic button remotely, and this is through the use of Gabriel's proprietary smart cameras all over the facility, right? And
Mhm.
those cameras and the panic button and Gabriel's system are referred to as activation triggers. Yeah.
Huh.
So basically, and they admit this, it's AI and machine learning that decide whether the alarm mode is triggered or not. Yeah.
Right.
And so they advertise this as a thing to stop mass shootings. So they say, for example, the smart camera can identify weapons. Yeah. It sees a weapon in the camera feed. It can recognize it just like it can recognize your face. It has facial recognition as well, right? And so it can recognize a weapon in the parking lot before the person hits the building. You connect it to the doors of the facility. It locks the doors and keeps them from coming in, right? That doesn't
Mhm.
sound too bad, right? I mean, yeah, mass shootings are horrible, so we don't want them to happen. But that's not where this stops.
Right.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, they're making major efforts to court retail, banking, Silicon Valley, what have you. The examples they give for banking and retailing on their own website are quite nuts. So, for
Yeah.
example, not only do they detect weapons, they can detect abnormal behavior. Well, what does
That
that
really,
mean? That's pretty
yeah, that
subjective, isn't it?
that creeped
And
me
one
out.
of their corporate examples for the banking sector is, you have loiterers in the bank lobby. Oh,
Deploy the
those
drones.
nasty loiterers. Yeah, it's basically like activate the security drones and clear the
Seriously.
scene. Yeah.
That's
I mean, we're
incredible.
laughing about it, but it's incredibly
Well, in a
Orwellian, isn't
facetious
it?
way. It's like, or like macabre. It's almost like it's so alarming that we have to laugh. Like they're literally, and she's not making that up, by the way. That's actually the drone
It's on the
deployment was
website.
discussed after loitering. Like it's just blowing my
Yeah,
mind.
yeah. Deploy
Gosh.
security to clear the scene, and it refers to like loitering and active shooter threats like it's the same thing. I mean, it's
Right.
just like, who are these guys? It's just silly.
I think.
So anyway, the abnormal behavior thing is also touted for retail.
Mhm.
Unusual behavior that may be shoplifting, alert security, automate
Right.
it all. The cameras do all the work. Um, and they talk about elsewhere, like if you go to their company page and they talk about their vision and what they've been working on, they claim to be constantly integrating new technologies. And so with this, there's all the different things that can activate the system, right? And so now
Mhm.
they're integrating what else? Security drones and robotics,
Right.
spot the dog, and the things we were talking about earlier, right, that might replace police. Those can be activated on site, potentially weaponized, and authorized to use deadly force,
Right.
and sent to hunt someone down who's been detected engaging in abnormal behavior.
It seems like on the surface of this, and I'm sure I mean, you've basically made the argument in the article in the same way, is that this is being overlapped with Carbine 911, and so you've got the police software, you've got the Carbine 911 centers,
Yeah,
then you've got the local area, that it's just a logical conclusion that this is going to be like, oh, it works. Now we're going to roll this out to everybody's homes. So now this is
yeah,
your new 911 essentially. And then your
they're
doors can be locked
piloting
on you.
it.
You can be
Yeah,
quarantined in any moment because they declare that. I mean, that's on the surface almost of this whole thing, isn't it?
yeah, this system is being piloted right now. And once
God.
they feel confident enough, they will scale it up and implement it everywhere. This
Is
next
that
generation 9/11 thing is really about to pop off really
right?
quickly. Mhm.
When you say that, is that just is that your opinion, or do you feel that is that stated explicitly somewhere that this is
Yeah,
going to eventually
Congress
roll out?
last year earmarked, I forget how much money, it's either 10 million, I think it's 10 billion. I mean, it's like a lot of money,
Mm,
explicitly to install next generation 9/11 nationwide
man,
because it was going too slow. Adoption of Gabriel also going too slow. So enter the anonymous philanthropist who's now
there you go.
paying for the systems to be installed all across the country. He
So
is planning to he's put up $1 million, and he's planning to put up money to get it in every school in the entire United States.
prior to this anonymous donation, this was kind of at a stall, and
Yeah.
the money, and
Sounds
so
like it.
this
Yeah, because they were going to, well,
behavior,
it was at a stall for schools and churches and
right?
their initial targets, right?
Hmm.
They were getting more interest from these other sectors, apparently, Silicon Valley, banking, retail.
Hmm. Interesting. And then
So,
in
like I
comes
said
the
earlier, the reason they really wanted to target schools and these other types of places is because they're traditionally places that aren't going to want systems like this. They don't
mhm.
need systems like this.
Other
Retail is
than
gonna be like, "We wanna stop shoplifters." Great,
right,
this
right.
system will do that. Or banking, "We wanna stop people robbing the bank." This will do that. So the only thing you can do to really market that to a school is be like, "This will stop a mass shooting." But if mass shootings aren't constantly happening and the fear isn't jacked up,
Mhm.
they're not gonna shell out, 30 grand for this system.
Right. Well, so
Mhm.
obviously the pre-crime overlap to all of this is the biggest concern for me. And we discussed clearly that there's a very dangerous intelligence background that drives this in its own nefarious
Yeah.
directions. But can you speak on the pre-crime direction? I mean, you and I've talked about a lot about this, but for those that may be
Yeah.
new to this whole thing, why that's such a concern and
Well,
how it can
if
be abused, especially with these
mhm.
people. Go ahead.
If you pull up the article, it's in there.
Mhm.
Gabriel on their vision part of their website says we basically anticipate this being used as a completely automated system at some point in the not so distant future. I don't remember the exact quote,
I'm
but
just
it's
gonna
in the
search for it.
article. But they're
Oh yeah,
essentially
go ahead.
saying that, they're installing it as it is now, but they're continually upgrading it. And the way it's going is going, and they even highlight it, like they put it in bold themselves on their website to stop
Mhm.
mass shooters before they strike.
Right, right.
Yeah,
And
there
so
it is.
can you
Identify mass casualty threats prior to the first action taken. And
right.
it's anticipate mass casualty events based on human behavior. What does
And
that mean? So,
there's a core
oh,
question that we always bring up in this constitutionally, right? Like, even if somebody was actually planning on committing a crime, how can we legally arrest somebody and charge somebody if crimes haven't been committed yet? And that gets into this dangerous world that's being created. Go ahead. You have a
yes.
thought?
So here's why this is bad. So right before that part you highlighted, see how it
Mhm.
says based on human behavior? So
Right.
these smart cameras that Gabriel has, we've already seen it, right? We just
Mhm.
talked about it. They
Right.
detect abnormal behavior. They're not just surveilling you, they're studying you.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's just like Carbine, what I mentioned earlier. The whole idea of trying to analyze your past and current behavior to predict what you will do in the future. This is pre crime. And it's all based on studying your behavior. And this is all, Palantir, Carbine, Gabriel, they're all doing the same thing. And they're all interconnected companies.
So you kind of
They are
feel that,
studying human behavior to determine who will commit a crime in the future and who won't, and you'll be at the mercy of the algorithm because all this shit, like they say here, is going to be automated.
so do you
Automated.
feel that
No people.
the crime stopping factor is more of just an excuse to be able to study people for other reasons, or is that, how do you see that fitting in? Is that just the lie?
I think, well, like we said earlier, ultimately the goal of pre-crime, just like it dovetails with the censorship agenda. It's all
Mhm.
about stopping dissent. Okay.
Right.
So I mean, I think that's ultimately what pre-crime's about. You're stopping people based on, well, look at how pre-crime's already been used since Bill Barr made it policy in
Mm.
2019. It's most of the people that have been arrested under that particular program called Deep were arrested because of their social media activity or their online activity.
Yeah. That's a chilling statement. I mean, and so so this would arguably include also online activity, or that's already happening, right? So we don't even need to include that. That's
Yeah.
already
So
done essentially.
but this is the other side of it. So,
Mhm.
they're trying to go after people based on what they do online and analyzing them based on what the data they mine off them offline, but they also want to essentially data mine you by what you're doing in the real world as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then
And so they're detecting abnormal behavior, these cameras, but they also, some of the examples they give, they also detect fights between people. So, like, there's a fight in a school lunchroom. It'll be picked up by Gabriel's cameras. They'll know which students are fighting, right? So, if
hmm.
you're keeping files on all of these students and their behavior, you'll have you'll have, a dossier, I guess, of which students are more likely to fight and engage in physical violence, won't you?
And that's just one small example. I see where you're going with that, and
Yeah.
that's pretty chilling. And then you could argue this is going used to create these dossiers on everybody, and then
Sure. Which
effectively use that
students
to
are
control
so
people's
antisocial? Because remember
right,
the profile of the school shooter?
right.
Antisocial, weird, doesn't fit in, abnormal behavior that's not necessarily violent, right?
I'm just waiting for the one moment when this actually comes to the point in which they say this person was about to murder people, and
Yeah.
then we see someone get in trouble for that. Like, I don't even know how you come back from that. That's the worry for me right
That's the agenda. That's
now. No,
predictive
exactly.
policing. And
Right.
Palantir has been piloting that since 2015. So predictive policing as like policy has been in the works for almost a decade now.
People don't
And
even
they'll
know
roll it
that.
out at some point.
You made this great point in the article, and people don't even realize that it may not be front and center on everything that's happening, but it's already policy if and when they want to use it, right? The
Yeah.
pre-crime, yeah, and people don't
Mhm.
even realize this stuff. There's so much going on
Mm-mm.
right on the surface that people aren't paying attention to.
Yeah.
This is disconcerting at the very least. Well, so what do we do? How do we take action in your opinion right now to stop circumvent? I mean, I don't believe voting harder is going to make this not happen. It doesn't seem to stop
No,
depending on who's
no,
in
it's
power.
not.
So what do you
So
think?
a lot of my work, and you and Derek and other people have made the same point as well. It's really important to get local, right? And
Mhm.
so getting local also involves, well, like Catherine Austin Fitts says it too. Like, you have to like know your sheriff, you have to know your bank, you have to know all these services you depend on. Um, so, is your local law enforcement agency, your local police department, using Mark 43? Is your
Yeah.
local emergency services provider using Carbon 911? Is your kid's school using Gabriel? Is, your church using I mean,
Right.
it's time to start looking for it. Or, if you don't want them to use it, maybe let them know that this is being shopped around and it's not okay. And there's no, by the way, statistical or evidence of any type that Gabriel actually prevents mass shootings. It's just a marketing claim.
Wouldn't you argue, in fact, that there's much evidence to the opposite? I mean, I
What
think
that
we've seen
it
many that it doesn't work. That it actually, they're like, for instance, the facial recognition. That we've seen the study after study that shows that it actually largely, whether it's like
Oh, like it's
60%
racially
effective.
biased and all this
Yeah,
stuff?
things like
Yeah. I
that.
mean, that's
Exactly.
very probable with something like Gabriel because, again, it's using artificial intelligence for all of this. Yeah. Mhm.
Which is at this point being, it's human
Or
input
it's
that's guiding
wrong.
them.
I mean, remember the company I wrote about for TLEV a couple years ago, Diagnostic Robotics? They were
Mhm.
predicting COVID outbreaks before they happen, the pre-crime approach, but applied to medicine.
Yeah.
And their like company promotional material says that the accuracy of their AI is only like 72%. And
That's
that's never been audited, right? So if it was
right.
audited, it would probably be lower, right? Probably like
Yeah.
50%. And if it's at or close to 50%, it's no better than flipping a coin.
Right.
So you want to like base, decisions that can totally ruin someone's life or even get them killed on something that's that inaccurate, that's just flipping a coin. I mean, it's like being ruled by the Batman villain Two-Face. I mean, it's totally insane. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I think that's a major issue with AI in general,
Mhm.
is
I
the
agree.
idea that if you look at corporate America today, there is a culture of corruption, just as there is in government. So you have
Mhm.
that same culture existing in the artificial intelligence industry. So if they know they can get away with having something not that accurate, but they can sell it and get it used and get it implemented and make money off of it, they'll do it. And then, what if we end up having a world that's being run by AI, but AI that was just like designed by a bunch of grifters,
Exactly.
right? Or
You
people
made that
just trying
argument.
to like, have a tech unicorn and maybe have an IPO and cash out, get it. I mean, there's a lot of people in the industry probably doing that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Because it's like that in a lot of other industries. Look at Moderna. I mean, they're a company just like that.
Exactly.
And they get their product that kills people, subsidized and injected into a bunch of people, but it doesn't work, and they know it doesn't work. Right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that definitely exists in the AI industry. Which companies those are, I'm sure we'll find out with time, but you don't want to have decisions that mean life and death for somebody made by an algorithm like that. And when you implement that type of technology into law enforcement and you take humans out of the equation, people argue like, oh, well, there's so much human error. And like, yeah, of course there is. But is the AI's error going to be worse than the human error? You don't actually know, because a lot of what you've been told to make you think that it's better is marketing and not actually based on any sort of data.
At the very least, it's theoretical, right? I mean, we're not there yet. So
Yeah.
it's incredible that we go off of what these same people trying to manipulate our opinions have to say about what we should think about their products. It's fun. But
Yeah.
I think that my big concern, at least in the moment where people's minds are, is I mean, it makes sense that this could be tried to roll. There could be an attempt to roll this out using the fervor around the medical discussion, right? Like using this as some kind of predictive tool, rebranding it toward preventing, outbreaks, which is already happening, as you've talked
Oh,
about. You've
exactly.
already seen
That's
Biden
something
roll out. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
that's something I thought about with Gabriel, but didn't put in the article. Imagine this being applied not to preventing mass shootings, but to prevent COVID cases,
It's the same
right?
model, right? It's the same surveillance, the temperatures, and it's the same damn thing. Biden just
So,
rolled
like,
out another.
remember how in Canada there were a couple churches, and also in the US, that like defied lockdown orders? If
Mhm.
you have Gabriel in your church, law enforcement will come as soon as someone goes through the doors in a COVID style lockdown, right?
Or how about we go one
And
step further and we're smart cities and the doors won't open for you, right? Or
oh,
the
exactly. Yeah.
heat gets turned up to
Well,
100 degrees. It's like that's
yeah.
the
Well,
kind of stuff that
Gabriel's
will
supposed
happen.
to like connect directly to like door locks and stuff.
Right. That's
Yeah.
crazy. But yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, Biden just executed about $100 million more for basically gain of function. Not even basically, it's openly talking about more virus. I forget the term of what they're calling it now, but it's like we've come full swing back to promoting gain of function for the very safety that they claim gain of function caused us to be. Like it's ridiculous.
But that's
But my point,
always been the justification for gain of function, though.
right, exactly. And so now we're back
Yeah.
with like blink and we're right back there. I think it's one step away from using, just transitioning that. So again, just we need to I like your point there. Go local, go speak to your police station and be like, "Are you using this? Do you understand what this really is?" And maybe you can change their minds.
You need to convince the people in the police department that Mark 43 is a stepping stone to all their jobs going away, because that's
There
what
you
it
go.
is.
Great point.
Yeah. They're all
Exactly.
going to lose their jobs. They're all out of a job. Hmm.
There you go, guys. I mean that is one
Same
thing
with
we can always
9/11 dispatch people.
Yeah.
They're going to
Right.
automate this stuff.
Right. I
You'll
mean,
be out
and
of a
really, you could
job.
logically you could point out probably 15 other job career realms that it would probably overtake and completely remove as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But
But
the
I
thing
think that,
is, like I said earlier, when you're dealing with law enforcement, this is life and death decisions. It's a little
yeah,
bit different than AI running the McDonald's.
exactly.
Yeah,
And
AI
so
makes
think
a
about,
mistake with your hamburger, no one dies. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, they're doing the same thing
Gabriel makes a
militarily.
mistake, the wrong security drone comes in and shoots the wrong person for abnormal behavior that's not abnormal. That's
Mhm.
really serious. So
Or
when this is being Mhm.
what happens when it shoots a teen that's carrying a squirt gun, or some because the shadows were just wrong. I mean, I don't know. The point is, it could end up happening that way. And the point we're making is, what do you do then? Who's accountable? Oh, the system. It was an error. We'll correct it. That's what happens. Right? I mean, like legally speaking, we've already seen these weird precedents set. We're talking about it's not, it's like, I mean, there's been movies about this too, right? It's not a person. This is just a software. This is a product. We'll decommission it and then problem solved. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of mindset that people already have about this stuff. So when you have something that serious, like life and death, I mean, we shouldn't be allowing
Yeah,
these people who have already led us to where we are now make these decisions at all about anything,
sure.
quite frankly. But
And the other angle in this article that we haven't talked about yet is this networking idea. So the
mhm,
whole vision, right, of this anonymous philanthropist, who, if you ask me, is probably just an intelligence agency, like not even a person.
I agree completely.
Yeah. His vision is to have all the schools on the same platform. That's a direct quote from the co-founder of Gabriel, citing the philanthropist that contacted him out of the blue. Yeah. on the same platform. Okay. So if you look at Gabriel's website, they talk about the network effect and having all these different buildings in your community connected to their system. And that it's all like basically like if someone's barred, and deemed a threat, like a potential, going to commit some violent crime somewhere, they'll be locked out of the place they're going into, but they'll be locked out of everywhere in the
Right.
whole community, right? Will
And we're
make
just talking about,
manhunts a lot easier, won't it? That's
yeah.
basically what it's kind of sold as being about, but there's more to it than just that, right? So
Mhm.
what's the fourth industrial revolution? Well, if you ask the guy that came up with the term, Klaus Schwab, he'll
Mhm.
say a merging of our physical and digital worlds. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So the Internet of Things, there's subsets of that. Two of the subsets I mentioned in the article are the Internet of Places and the
Mhm.
Internet of Bodies. Right. So I know on your program, you've talked about the Internet of Bodies, which is, sensors in and on your body. And then the Internet of Places is empowering buildings with sensors and all that same kind of stuff. So the
Right.
Internet of Places infrastructure, that's what Gabriel is,
So smart cities, smart
basically.
meters, smart everything. Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The school building will call 911.
Right.
Yeah. The street lamp will call 911
Huh.
if they see something abnormal. And I mean, that's basically what this is. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's all meant to be interfaced and stuff. And so one of the other functionalities, and I didn't mention this in the article, is that geofencing is like a thing that Gabriel does. And so that basically means it creates like this perimeter around the location where it's installed, and it keeps track of what devices, like Internet of Things devices or smartphones or whatever, are coming in and out of the
Hmm.
fence, the geo
Yeah.
fence around it,
Interesting.
right? So it's meant to have like this functionality with like Internet of Bodies, Internet of Places. And if you look at for definitions from like, the mainstream of what the Internet of Things is all about, it's the way to merge the digital and physical worlds. That's how they define it. So that's basically the bread and butter of the fourth industrial revolution.
Man. I
And
see
they're
there.
using our fear of violent crime, mass shootings, which if you look at the history of a lot of mass shootings in the US, there's a lot of weird FBI stuff going on. And actually, one of
Right.
those weird ones, the Pulse nightclub shooting, was the ostensible justification for creating Gabriel.
Right. And that
So,
that was rife with questions. I mean, there's lots in that in most of these
yeah, I
events, there's
mean, the
weirdness
shooter's
to the.
dad was all tied up with political power in the US and was
Mhm.
a big time FBI informant and all the stuff, and a lot of other weird unanswered questions there. Same
There's
with the
one
El Paso Walmart shooting that justified Bill Barr's pre-crime policy, among
right,
other things.
right.
So,
There's one thing I wanna add before we kind of finish up today is that there's something I
mhm.
was just trying to find real quickly for Jicky Leaks on Twitter had been talking about a recent study there, or rather just kind of direction of investigation in regard to the codon optimization. I'm having trouble finding it really quickly, but the argument being made is that there is. Oh, here we go. I think this is it. Yeah. So this is really interesting. Now, this is just an argument being made. Let's see. Tell me what you think about this in the context of what we're talking about right now. Is that this is saying that once you realize that there's no biological reason for different codon optimizations to produce the exact same protein, you realize it allows the manufacturer to tag any person that has had their product. Now, there is some validity to what the argument. People can dispute about how this could be applied, but just for sake of conversation, think about how that might overlap. If we're actually, or even just for entertaining the possibility that maybe now or in the next phase or in the future, there could be something that's mass distributed that then allows some kind of interface with what's being built. We talked
Well,
about that right
sure.
in the beginning. So go ahead. You have
Yeah,
thoughts on
but you
that?
don't have to even like take even COVID vaccines out of the equation. There is
Right.
major efforts throughout the healthcare industry to get sensors permanently into you
That's what
or
I
to
mean.
connect your pacemaker to the Internet of Things and all that
Right.
kind of stuff. Yeah, so
I'm
that's
posing the
coming.
idea that what if it already happened, or what if it's the point is that
Yeah,
kind of
but I
just for
mean,
sake of
even if
conversation.
it whether it has already happened or hasn't already happened, it's coming. I mean, it will
Right.
be more overt very soon. And I would argue that the reason the current FDA commissioner, Robert Califf, is there, he's a former Google Health guy. He's there to sign off on this stuff because don't forget, the FDA doesn't just approve vaccines and all that kind of stuff. They also approve medical devices.
Hmm.
and they are going to rubber stamp all of this, Internet of Bodies style stuff, and jam it through. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to include that because it's a, an interesting discussion about things that are on, like, whether you think it's happened or not, as you're saying, things that are being openly discussed in research and medical fields about how this is what needs to happen, right? So it's not far-fetched. The question is when, essentially, and then in this world of smart cities and geo gridding, all this different stuff we're talking about, how does that play a fact? Is there a possibility that, let's say, you go into some building and it triggers the door locking because you don't have something that you're supposed to, right? That's kind of where mine goes with this, and that could apply to something you're supposed to be
But
carrying in your
that
pocket or
already
something that's in
happened
your
with
body.
COVID.
I know
That
that
already happened with some people in COVID. They had the
that's what I'm getting at.
wrong, like, a red QR code. I think this was mainly in China, right? And the door wouldn't
Right.
open and stuff.
That's
So,
what I'm
yeah.
saying. But I'm saying, so
Mhm.
right now we already have phones, but where's the step at which something is internalized? We're not just implantables, but done without our knowledge. Moral bioenhancement should be covert. These are the kind of things they've talked about. I'm just posing a thought for people to think about to go forward, because this is some alarming stuff, and I'm really glad you covered this and you continue to, because with all the stuff going on in the world, these kind of things really do fall by the wayside. So thank you for covering this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of these companies need to be looked at a lot more carefully. And I've written about a lot of different companies in the past. So the three I mentioned today are mainly on law enforcement. But, like, for example, in 2020, I did a series on a company that I think is definitely a front under the metrics we discussed earlier in the show.
Hmm.
Cyber Reason, and they're
Right.
basically running major systems of the U.S. military right now
Yeah.
as their
We talked
cybersecurity provider.
we talked about them in 2020, right?
Yeah,
Right
because
ahead of the
they
election.
predicted that the 2020 election was going to fail and cause a bunch of civil unrest, and then January 6th happened.
Right.
And they predicted that at the end of 2019. Great
Yeah.
predictive
Yeah.
abilities.
Right. We should be questioning whether it was predicted or just, something else. But either way, yeah, this has been happening for a long time. Make sure you guys check out all this
Yeah.
previous work as well as on Unlimited Hangout, and just how clear this has been for quite a long time. What are some other discussions like that either you've had on Unlimited Hangout or on TLAV do you think are important to overlap with this? I've included some of the ones you referenced in general. Why a shadowy tech firm with ties to Israeli intelligence is running
Yeah,
doomsday
that's the
election
cyber
simulation.
reason stuff.
Mhm.
So the other one would be some articles I did for TLAV, the ones about the World Economic Forum Partnership Against Cybercrime. I'll be having a
Mhm.
video about that out next week because, like, with pre-crime being the national security state's effort to fuse and essentially take over law enforcement functionality, they're also the same national security state is going to take over the banks, and it's the Partnership Against Cybercrime is how the model they're following. And the Department of Justice and FBI are signed up to it. They're members.
I mean, if you're worried
So,
about right now being shut down from being able to protest, or, you protest and have your bank shut down, wait until it's all completely
oh yeah,
interconnected.
because the whole goal of that is to end financial and online anonymity.
Right.
This is the model for how they're going to illegalize crypto. 100%. There
Or
will be
shut
some sort of false flag ransomware attack that, unlike the ransomware attacks of, like, the past couple years,
Mhm.
it'll have a major impact. And since all the big banks are part of this too, it'll be the financial system, right?
Mhm.
Can't access your money. Oh, poof, your money's gone. A great, cover for banks to do bail-ins and all other sorts of stuff that we know they have to do because
Yeah.
the economy's collapsing.
We're already
And
seeing.
then gives them great justification for CBDC's completely surveilled digital money. And then connecting your internet, activity to a government issued ID so that no one can ever engage in private, anonymous activity in the online or financial world ever again. And they will say that's the only way to prevent cybercrime. We have to surveil and know it all.
Hmm, it's a
And I
chilling
mean, it
future.
totally ties in with the same pre-crime, on the law enforcement side.
Right.
Surveillance is always the solution, you
Which
know?
we've seen proven to be the opposite in regards to 9/11, but we just
Yeah.
keep going forward.
Whether it's cyber crime or violent crime, they're going to say every time the solution is more of this invasive surveillance, profiling, data mining, human behavior analytics, pre-crime stuff.
Hmm.
Hmm.
It really is just a chilling picture for the future, and I really hope that we're able to push back enough. And I think we have it. I think enough people see this. It's just about mobilizing that kind
It's
of resistance.
becoming, though, increasingly obvious, right? So, like, when
Yeah,
you and I, back in like early 2020, were talking about how the national security state wants to eliminate private car ownership in the United States, people are
right.
like, that sounds insane. And
Hmm.
now it's like out in the open,
Well, there was even a reference
right?
to legacy systems in the coverage you had in this article, right? I mean, there's an
Yeah.
overlap. Obviously, it's like just so
Hmm.
yet again, clearly will continue to shout out Whitney's body of work. Just make sure you
Thanks.
check this. I mean, it really is. It's important to understand how much of that has actually come to pass. I know you always hate when I do that, but it's important for people to go back and look and really understand how much has been not just, guessing correct, but like outlined, sourced. Here's why the argument's being made. And then it like quite literally comes to pass. It's just really alarming. So listen to what's happening right now, what's being discussed. These are things we can stop. I truly believe that. We just need to actually mobilize. And I'm not talking about violence, but get people aware of these
Yeah.
things and
You
use the
just get
information we have.
local and let your police officers know that they're about to be out of a job and replaced by robots, and how fun is that going to be? Because also keep in mind, pretty much everyone with any sort of like combat training, police, veterans, military veterans, are the people that they're most worried about.
Right, right. I mean, the argument to make about, whether or not Trump was somebody who was on, I honestly think that this was done a certain way. So during COVID's rollout, the people who would be most resistant to it were pacified. And I've said that many times, but I do think that there's something to that. But either way, I agree with you. I think that they're most concerned with the people that believe in the Constitution. That's why they make them listed under domestic terrorists, the very document this country's founded on. But yeah, thank you for joining today and going over this. I just think this is some very important stuff. So anything else you want to leave us
Yeah.
with going
No,
forward?
I
Things
think
coming up?
that's probably enough. But
Okay.
thanks a lot, Ryan. Always great to be on.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. I'll leave you guys with a little Klaus Schwab montage since we mentioned the fourth industrial revolution, and
Uh,
always question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
What the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, right. Just as an example, it's you who are changed. Yeah. And of course, this has a big impact on your identity. Yeah.
It is important to use the COVID-19 crisis as a timely opportunity. So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen. The cut which we have now is much too strong in order not to leave traces.